Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This is a very exciting day for us at this PBC and of course, the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, because through this day, we'll be launching the third round of the Employers of Choice Gender Diversity Awards. And why it's important for us is that it represents a stage in our journey at the PBC. As I often tell people, we started the journey in 2017, where we identified a number of findings that the private sector should work on. And we have been supporting the private sector in this journey. These findings include increased representation of gender in the workplace, also family-friendly policies, getting more women or women-owned businesses in the supply chain, and all the supporting things that companies need to do that. So we've been advocating within the organization to build strong and effective gender strategies, and keep on having targets that you can measure and manage. And what the Gender Diversity Awards does, through a scorecard, we check the pulse of what Pakistani companies are doing and where they are, because there's a lot of data outside our organizations, but that data is very skewed. And if we want to see the impact that we're creating, we would love to get more, basically more submissions into our awards, and also help showcase the good practices from companies who have participated in the award. So if you if all of you apply, what we do is, when we go through our through all the entries, we do identify the good practices that companies are doing. So at this point, today the discussion is about the scorecard, but the next webinar, the discussion will be about what were the good practices that we saw in 2023. And perhaps it will help you give you ideas for your 2024 and 2025 planning as well. So that's something to look forward to in the next webinar. So now I'm just going to hand over to Rajaa and Safia, who've been working very hard in updating the scorecard and getting the process ready to talk about the scorecard and the overall the application process for the Gender Diversity Awards. So over to you, Rajaa.
Thank you so much, Nazish. I'm very excited today. Like Nazish said, this is a big day for us because we have not only do we want to launch the third cycle, but we have made some changes to the scorecard that you have been seeing for the past 2 years. The scorecard was initially developed with the International Finance Corporation, with their economic and gender inclusion team. And we have been successfully running the past 2 cycles based on the questions that were there. Now, since we have been able to see in the past 2 years how effective the scorecard is in capturing important best practices and data related to women's participation in the formal sector, we also have been able to see where we would like some more information, or where we would like to clarify exactly what we're looking for. So under that philosophy, we've made some edits to the scorecard. The questions are still comparable to the previous versions. The essence is still there. A lot of the same questions are still there, which would be good news for companies that have consulted with us after the awards as to how they can solidify their gender diversity disclosure process. But what we've done is we've also added helpful aids for companies to understand exactly what we're looking for when we pose a certain question. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to display the scorecard to you. And then we will just scroll through it one by one, go over all the different questions. And this scorecard is available on the website, right, Safia? It's been uploaded there already. So this will be easy for you to just download and review after the webinar is over. The webinar is also going to be uploaded on our website. So we have the same preamble. We have the 5 principles that we use to categorize our questions. We will be looking at leadership's role in promoting gender diversity and holding our organization accountable to the public. We will be looking at the representation of women in the workforce for the organization. We will be looking at how well women are compensated in the workplace, what are the gaps in the earnings between men and women, and what companies are doing to address that gap. We will then look at a very comprehensive section on how to create a good, safe, and dignified working environment. And then finally, what companies can do to actually promote women up the career ladder so that they can also be a part of the leadership of those organizations, and also feel like they have had the experience of professional development and training and development of their skill sets. The reporting cycle is for the past 3 years, which is traditional sustainability reporting. So the past 3 years would then be from the 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2023. A lot of you probably align this with how your fiscal year starts on the 1st of July of every year, and then it ends on the 30th of June of every year. So for 3 years, we would love it if the data comes in segregated for each year, but that depends upon how you've actually documented that data for your organization. So the total number of points is 130. We usually normalize points so that they're out of 100 when we make year-on-year comparisons. But that is the total number of points. The points are always clear, by the way. So I would encourage companies, whoever is submitting on behalf of a certain company, to sort of tally the points yourselves if you can, see where you're doing well, where you can improve. You have up until May 15th, if I'm right, Safia? Yeah. So you have until May 15th to submit your final document. We obviously would like it if you started submitting earlier, but then but that just helps us score faster. Though the award cycle will still, the award ceremony will still take place in August. So we also, I guess, have time to review. So take your time, calculate, tally the points, and make sure that you're satisfied with the submission. So the first question under the first section of leadership and accountability is focused on how publicly a company has declared its support for gender equality. So then you can look at things like stating the importance of gender equality in your annual report, on your company website, on social media. This is the number of sources can be really comprehensive for this question. So companies usually have a folder for question 1A. We strongly recommend that you combine everything together. Submit it as one source. We don't look at multiple sources. We have in the past, but it takes a lot of time. So this time we will take if there are multiple sources, we will take the first source, and that we will consider as a response to the question, even if it's not the most adequate one. The second question then is also, this is a new one. It also wants, we want to see if companies are sensitive to the portrayal of women and any kind of minority group in their corporate marketing, and whether they have embedded that in their in a larger corporate policy. So avoiding stereotypical or negative portrayals of women and girls, using socially conscious language, being inclusive in your marketing strategy. We're not looking for links to the ads that you use. We're looking for a set of guidelines that the company follows, that they adhere to. For anyone who's thinking that this is not relevant to them, the scorecard is very comprehensive. Perhaps it's not this question, or perhaps it's not in the sense of, ads for like cooking oil, but see if this question is somehow relevant to you. See if you, use socially conscious language in any public announcement that you make that avoids stereotypical portrayals of women. Then the next question is also something that we've seen before, proof of gender assessment, but we've included exactly what a gender assessment should look like. And then similarly, we have asked for targets on gender equality before, but this time we've also specified exactly what those targets should look like. So year on year, you want to increase the number of women in your workforce to 23% by the year 2025. something like that, very numerical, very time specific. Companies do include other types of data as well. For example, a department-wise breakdown of how they want to increase women, or if you're a large group, then business group wise breakdown as well. So those targets can be specific to functions and departments and businesses. The more clarity that we receive, the more we appreciate it. Currently, the question has 2 points, but we might include 1 point for partial disclosure. But let's see. The way the question is right now, hopefully that is a good explanation, and then you try to disclose as comprehensively as possible. This is another section that is new. There were a couple of questions last year on it, but this time we've sort of expanded on that. We are looking at the incorporation of gender equality into a larger sustainability framework. A lot of companies have done some really good work in sustainability and climate change and reducing their carbon emissions and supporting climate action. And the fact is that climate change, a lot of climate action very positively impacts underserved groups, so women and other minority groups. So if you have done a lot of work in climate action and you think it's relevant, then you can give us this data specifically on how your actions have impacted women. And this is a good way for companies to then consistently promote their gender equality objective. So the first question is on how you disclose gender diversity related performance indicators in your sustainability report. This question specifically needs an excerpt from your sustainability report. By now, a lot of companies should be publishing them. I know that we have been working on publishing sustainability reports and help writing them and consulting with companies on them for the past 5 years. So we are hoping that many companies have reached that point now themselves. The SECP, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, has drafted some guidelines on how gender-related metrics can be reported. So we are specifically looking for those metrics. They're very basic: your gender pay ratio, your workforce representation, especially in terms of tiers, and your board member composition in terms of gender. If you fully comply, it's 1 point. If you partially comply, it's 0.5. Then the next question is related to your commitment, exhibiting your commitment to gender inclusive climate action. So in this case, because this question is new, we have listed options, and you'll see that throughout the scorecard. So for this question, we've listed some options that companies can see, oh, this is a way I can actually answer this question. There's another option for things that we have not captured. And then in 1H, similarly, what are the tools and services offered? We've given examples of the types of tools and services that women can avail through your organization. And then we've also shown asked you to show us how well women are represented in decision-making when it comes to climate change. This number here is an overall number that covers women in your board, managers, so leading sustainability teams, people that you've consulted with, so external consultants, etc. And then finally, companies are required to publish environmental and social impact assessment reports. So we've asked you to give us evidence of that. That ends this section. I hope no one is discouraged from applying to the awards just yet. The next section focuses on representation. So straight up, I want to clarify that we're looking for representation of your permanent workforce. We do not count contractual workers as a part of your workforce representation. The scoring is a bit similar to the same. The categories we've given are similar. The reason it's just like we say more than 35% or up is because women represent 49% of Pakistan's population, as per the last census. So if you can, it's better if companies reflect that, but I know that many companies are still getting there. So just pick the range that you think is most suitable for your company. Please do not submit as the names of your employees or any identifying information. While obviously if someone does that, we don't publish this data anywhere, but I would also discourage just from the get-go. We're looking for one solid number. And this number needs to be reflected throughout your organization. Then we are looking at specific policy documents that help you reach the policies that help you reach this number. So how are you recruiting women? What are your specific policies to do that? Are you, for example, using gender inclusive language in your job post? Have you trained your HRBP and recruitment panels on unconscious bias, so that there is a bias-free recruitment process, things like that in an official document, and signed off by a manager looking who owns this policy. Then we have a couple of points for returnship programs. Half a point for returnship and half for specialized internships, because we've noticed that these are ways in which companies have introduced women into the workforce again. Points are slightly less because returnship programs are not they're not for permanent, they usually don't guarantee permanent employment. They're usually contractual, 6 months to a year. And specialized internships look at, for example, if you're recruiting someone from universities, so that they can that they can come into a very male-dominated field. So that's where a specialized internship is usually used. So there are half points for that. That's why I was assuring everybody from the beginning that you can get points somehow in this very comprehensive scorecard. Then we've also included other numbers. These are numerical, and they're there to measure the satisfaction and retention of your female employees. So what are the turnover rates, attrition, retention, and absenteeism rates? These are data. So we've noticed that this data is declared to us, particularly companies are putting them in their sustainability reports. This is why we have made a question for this. This is really good information. When we want to do an analysis, we always think that I wish we knew what those numbers were, right? Because it really helps determine how well companies are not only keeping track of their ability to retain women, but how successful their programs are to keep women in the workforce. So numerical information only, relevant to the reporting cycle, so 2020 to 2023, and split by year and gender. That would be the ideal way in which this information is provided to us. If you are not currently recording this information, and then you do so for this project, then you can have the document signed off by, like I said, the manager who owns this function. Okay, I wanted to also say, if there's an asterisk next to a question, that means that multiple options can be selected for this question. And then we also wanted to look at intersectionality, because it's just not, women are not, the role of women in the workplace is not just impacted by the fact that they're women, but also by other identities and groups and backgrounds. So we've included this as well. We would ask companies to then report us these numbers, and we would want that to contain information that's already been publicly disclosed. So what religious minorities are in your organization that the women belong to, how many women with disabilities are part of your organization, gender and sexual minorities, so particularly transgender people, ethnic minorities, and then finally refugee and immigrant minorities. If you have been collecting this data, that's fantastic. And you can look at the scorecard, download it, and start the process now if that is something that you need to do. But we do want the data to already have been publicly disclosed. So then we have leadership. So we used to have just one question before on senior management. Now we're looking at directors separately from non-executive directors, separately from the company's executive management. So executive management is more involved in the day-to-day decision-making of the company. So that's why these two questions have been listed separately. And there is also this issue that sometimes companies have, to fulfill a SECP requirement, have hired one woman on multiple boards, or there's only one woman on the board, and that makes it appear as though senior management does have women, but then in the day-to-day, no women are involved in decision making. So that's why these two questions have been segregated. Then the number of women in middle management, I've listed some examples of what is counted as middle management, and the same for lower management. This is another way for companies to make more points, because last time we only looked at middle management and not lower management. We didn't make that differentiation. Then we have gender equality in the supply chain. So how many women-led businesses are a part of your supply chain? Once again, a numerical answer as a percentage of your registered suppliers. And then finally, what is your strategy or what actions have companies taken to incorporate more women-led suppliers? We need more women to be supported, female entrepreneurs, female-led businesses. So a part of the supply chain of a larger corporation, and it's usually large companies that apply to this, to these awards, is a great way for these entrepreneurs to be supported. Then section 3 out of the 5 sections that we have, average pay gap. We know pay gap, the disclosure on pay gap is still really low. But we are hoping that this year it's better. We've also included a tool that companies can use. This is, I think, from the Australian government, on how the pay gap can be calculated. And we want the pay gap to be listed for every year in the reporting cycle. So that means 3 numbers, comparing the total earnings of women to the total earnings of men within your organization. Then you can, there's a separate section on the details of the pay gap. Usually 3A and 3B have the same answer, but this is a great way to earn more points. Then 3C, how are you reducing the pay gap over years? A narrative that can be signed off by your management would be a good way to, to start this section, but we do want to see how the pay gap has fallen over the years. Then do you have a formal policy to compensate of your employees, the rewards and benefits policy that you have? This doesn't need to specify gender or women in particular, but the reason it's here is because we need to make sure that all the company has a bias-free process through which or a very objective process through which it decides the rewards and benefits for all employees. Then there are 2 more questions in this section, I think. No, actually 3 questions. Okay. What is your strategy to reduce the pay gap? So it's linked to the question that I mentioned earlier. That was numerical. This one, you can tell us what your strategy or approach is. And then because we've done a lot of work on, well, not a lot, but there has been some work on fair wage over the past few years. That word has become more popular. We hosted a workshop with Unilever last year on fair wage and living wage. So we do want to understand what other companies have done in this regard. So how have you officially calculated the living wage for the cities in which you operate? And how have you done the assessment of which employees are above or at living wage or below living wage even? And then in the last question, you let us know how many of your employees are actually above living wage. This is an extensive question, which is why it has a higher number of points. But this section in general is very a section where a lot of companies usually don't do very well. So we hope that through this webinar and the previous support that we provided, that this section now has a higher response rate. We're really looking forward to that. One thing you'll also notice is the very distinct absence of the public or private disclosure options that we used to have. Every question in the scorecard is now for public disclosure. So you cannot disclose to the BBC only. And that option does not exist. It used to exist before and it had less points. But now every question is for public disclosure. But as this is my reminder, once again, that as before, every question is voluntary. So you don't have to answer all the questions. So decide which question your company would be okay with disclosing publicly on, and then provide us the data. This is section 4. So paid maternity leave. This I want to just speak about for a minute. So paid maternity leave varies. The mandate varies throughout the country. Federal, I think if you're federally administered, then it's 6 months, and then it goes down to 4, 3, etc. Depending on which province you're operating in. So there is research that backs what is an ideal number of weeks or months that women should be provided when they go on paid maternity leave. And the question has now been rearranged to reflect that. Before we used to say, are you in compliance with the law, or is it more generous than the law, etc. Now it's basically telling you, is this the number of months that you provide paid maternity for? There were companies that, by the way, were much more generous than the law. So there were companies that provided 6 months or more. So we feel like it's only fair that those companies receive more points for a more generous paid maternity leave. It ends at 12 months because after that, research has shown that it's counterproductive to provide for women to be away from the office for so long, for more than a year. So 6 to 12 months would have the highest points, and 3 to 6, less than 3. And then finally, the option that we hope no one picks does not offer. And when we say paid maternity leave, that means 100% pay for the maximum possible duration. We do not want you to include special extensions in this question, or leaves provided in case of medical emergencies. This is for a standard birth. And so the policy also does, this question also does not want policies, will not mark for those policies that reduce the number of days depending on consecutive birth. It's basically the same maternity leave for all births for all female employees. We've also then we have a similar policy on similar approach to paid paternity leave. So for more than 3 months, 1 to 3 months, etc. Paid paternity leave is not even mandated to the private sector, at least outside of the federally administered territories. So asking whether your paternity leave is more generous than the law sort of doesn't make sense as a question. So once again, we looked at some research on what is the ideal amount of paid paternity leave that should be provided, and then hence I've given you those options. Then if you have other clauses in your parental leave, so for say parental leave for adoption or stillbirth, or in cases of miscarriage, or any other clause that helps parents out, then please let us know. There's additional points for that. And then how do you actually promote the uptake of paid parental leave? So this question was a bit confusing for the past 2 years. So this year we've included the steps that companies have taken. We've collected this from global information, but also from local information, and we've provided these options here. So if you feel like any of them are relevant to your organization, then you can see exactly what you can select and provide the data for. So this removes the confusion about what is relevant to this question. Then we have a question on providing us paid parental leave data. The only additional thing that we've included is if those employees that have returned from paid leave have stayed employed after 12 months. Then we have question 4F. This is also a confusing question, so we've included a note on exactly what counts as good evidence. So it is accommodating employees, providing care for elderly, ill, or disabled family members. And this does not include childcare options. Those are covered separately here, not in 4G actually. So this is a little error that we have to fix. It's actually covered in 4H. So you have a list of different types of childcare options that you can give us. We've also defined childcare here. Another question that addresses female health, female employee health and well-being, we've included certain provisions or services that companies can give employees access to. These are part of your benefits or your policies in general throughout the year. They should not be one-off. For example, breast exams only in October, or a mental health day. We were looking for regularly provided mental health services, and these breast exams are covered in medical insurance policy. We're looking at things like that. So something that's more permanent, available for your employees. Then Flexibility was a question that existed in the past two versions of the scorecard as well, but this time we've included the different types of options that we're looking at. So the reason to do that is because flexibility looks different from organization to organization, but more importantly, from employee to employee. So the same employees cannot have the same type of flexibility. And it's funny and ironic that, this is an inflexible approach to flexibility itself. I mean, if you have employees in your factory, then flexible work hours or locations are out of the question. But you can offer them shift selection or job sharing or compressing their work weeks. These are different things that people can avail. And then women who want to return to work and can't do that on a full-time basis, they can at least work part-time. If companies are offering that, that is a form of flexibility. So whatever is applicable to your organization, please provide us information on that. And it also helps us develop a better understanding of what companies are looking at, because we cannot provide all the possible options. These are some things that we've looked at globally that they're offered, locally that they're offered, and then you tell us what else can be offered. Then the last couple of questions, these are mandated to companies anyway by the government. So clean and accessible bathrooms for women, and the provision of a safe and private rest area, which is very relevant to factories. So if you can provide that, this is a great way to earn more points. And the last section of the fourth principle, we are looking at anti-harassment in the workplace. I think this is pretty straightforward. What we've done this time differently is included the different types of trainings and provided points on those trainings. So sexual harassment, training against sexual harassment, training against unconscious bias, training on the code of conduct, or what is the DI policy of companies. And if you've done refresher courses on that, just remember that we're looking for numerical data. So tell us the overall number of training sessions, or the total number of employees that have been trained, or the total number of training hours, and then you split that data by gender and specify that to the reporting cycle. And then we have a separate question for transgender employees. How does a company ensure that their work environment is safe and respectful, regardless of whether you have trans employees in your workplace or not? They could still be a part of your anti-harassment training or your D&I training. Then please tell us, how have you designed your grievance mechanism? What does it look like? How can employees use it? And then whether what was the number of grievances that were reported and resolved in the reporting cycle? We are not looking for zero. We're not judging whether how many grievances are filed or not. That doesn't even it's not even that relevant, to be honest. We want to know whether an employee feels comfortable enough using your grievance mechanism, and then whether the grievances filed are actually remediated or not. Then we have a couple more questions on whether companies have done anything to help employees who are facing domestic violence. This question is there because the domestic violence is endemic. Actually, it is a global problem, and it does lead to absenteeism, lower engagement. It creates an unsafe environment for women. So if companies have taken steps, and companies have, 4 or 5 companies submitted a policy that looks after victims of domestic violence, then please submit that to us. And then finally, what are the provisions to enable a safe commute in Pakistan for female employees? Because transport is considered one of the greatest factors that prevents women from working in the workplace. There's a research by the Asian Development Bank from, I think, 2017 that contains this data. We're now at the last section. This is section 5. It has 5 questions. How are you providing training, professional development training for female employees? What is your strategy to promote women employees? Please make it specific to women, just like the recruitment policy that we asked about. This one should also be specific. Even if it's not a policy, at least like an approach or an idea or some actions, a summary of actions that your company takes. Women, whether they have access to formal mentorship programs or not, whether women have access to networking opportunities. The mentorship program also provides networking opportunities, but women, female employees being able to connect with each other, offer support to each other, that kind of thing. For 5C, formal mentorship, I did want to mention some of the answers that we really liked from the last couple of cycles that showed how the mentors help women develop a career path for themselves, help them, understand what are their weaknesses, or how to work on their strengths, or how to deal with specific situations. For example, if you don't get along with your manager, or if you want to seek an opportunity somewhere. So mentors really assist in that. So programs that look into these things, they are very beneficial, and we would like to learn more about what your company is doing. Then finally, what is the number of women that is promoted every year in the reporting cycle within your organization? We do have a couple of questions coming in. So before we look at these questions, I do want to just transfer the spotlight, so to speak, to Safia. She wants to go over some of the different things that show up when we are looking at submissions, and what companies can do to counter that, and how can they make their submissions better, basically. So Safia, over to you.
Thank you, Rajaa. Okay. So I'm Safia, like Rajaa introduced. I look at the award cycle with Rajaa and my other colleagues at SERB. Today I'll just be discussing how the process looks like this year, what we've changed, and also some common guidelines and some common errors that we see. This helps companies to do better this year. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Okay. So this year, we'll close the submission on 15th May. After the submission is closed, we'll then proceed with, tallying the scores, announcing the when the award ceremony takes place. So the awards process initially was a little bit different. Companies who submitted previously probably are aware that initially we used to do a first review and then reach out to companies and provide some feedback. This year, we'll not be providing individual feedback to companies because we thought that would take it usually took lots of time, and it was really hard for us to tally and the companies to, take out that time once again, find the documents, send them to us. This year, we've changed it a little bit with the webinars, and we'll be hosting 3 webinars. This is the first one. The second and third webinars will cover more details about best practices, what companies can do, and they will be more focused towards answering the questions that you all might have. So after today, we'll be launching the scorecard. You'll probably get an email very soon from me, and where you'll see a nomination form. Once you fill out the form, we'll reach out to you with all the steps, and we'll keep reviewing as we get to the submissions. Once we've reviewed all the submissions and conducted our 3 webinars, we'll have the ceremony, and after the ceremony, we'll provide our individual consultations to companies. The individual consultations are really helpful because they help companies to not just see where they went wrong or what questions they scored less on, but they also help companies benchmark against other companies and see what best practices other companies might have. And they also show companies which areas they're lacking in and help companies to develop those policies in a better way and to create more gender equal workplaces. So some of the common errors that we see in submissions. For the first one is particularly towards the MNCs that we often see that there is no Pakistan specific data, and particularly for questions related to the anti-harassment law, the pay gap, and the number of women in the workplace. Since this project aims to capture data from Pakistan, we'd really appreciate, and we actually require the data to be Pakistan specific so that it helps us in our analysis. It helps us to see what companies are doing better. So this is something that we require, Pakistan specifically. And most companies do submit this data, but just for those that haven't done so in the past. And then also providing official documents is really important. If a policy has been adapted from global to Pakistan, we'd appreciate if you have something written on the top of the policy or some explanation as to how you adopted this policy according to the laws in Pakistan. And for companies that have their own policies that are local, we'd appreciate if the policies have logos, and we require the policies to have some form of the company name, because we sometimes get documents that are Word files or Excel files where there's no verification of whether the policy is actually from that company or not. And having the company's name and logo or somebody's signature on the policy document really holds accountability and shows us that companies are taking taking the scorecard and also just these policies a little bit more seriously. So that is one of the common errors. Other than that, it is really important to provide quantitative data, particularly for questions like the pay gap, grievances, and if the grievances are solved. Also for questions that ask for employee turnover, the number who have been promoted. If you don't provide quantitative data, unfortunately, you will not be able to score it and you will lose points. The last error is submitting multiple documents. While it is okay to have multiple proofs, they should be relevant. So if you find a question that might not be relevant to your company, or something that you don't have a policy or a proper strategy for, it's okay to not submit. Again, the entire scorecard is voluntary. So instead of submitting random documents or just trying to get a point, it is better to not submit because then we get confused as well, and it just like you don't really get a point if that policy is not there. So we'd appreciate if you actually submit policies that are present. And when you're submitting multiple proofs, it's way better to keep it organized in a single PDF. I will be discussing that in my next slide as well. So let's move on to that. Just some general guidelines about the submission. When you're submitting, please make sure that each section is labeled properly, and each section should have a specific folder. So section 1, section 2. If you have folders, it just makes it easier for us to find the proof. And then each section should have a folder that or a PDF that contains the proof for different questions in that section. So we've given some examples in the slide as well. These are all examples from companies that we received last year. And if you're uploading your sustainability reports or proof that might be a longer report or a longer copy, we'd appreciate if you could just mention the page numbers, because sometimes companies just upload sustainability reports or annual reports, which are more than 50 pages long, which are like 50 pages long.
I want to say here that also if you're going to upload your sustainability report, don't do it once, especially if it's relevant to multiple questions. Upload it multiple times, and then each time you can either put it up in the correct section, or you can just write the page number that we need to look at. Because we can't go through the sustainability report over and over again, just because it's being used as evidence for multiple questions.
Yeah, because when you upload the entire report, it gets really hard for us to actually go over it multiple times. And even though we have done that in the past, there is a possibility we might miss out on some things. So just in the best interest in getting the maximum points, it's better if you mention the page numbers, and because it does really make things easier for us as well. Then we have some other general guidelines about how to submit your submissions for the awards. So we'll have a Microsoft Forms go live. We'll post it on our social media. We'll send it out through email. Once you fill out that form, either Raja or I will get back to you with all the submission guidelines, and we'll tell you how to exactly submit. And then you can start the submission process. We'll also email you an Excel sheet that you can use to keep track of all the questions that you submitted. And if you would like, you can also tally your scores on that Excel sheet just for your own sake. So all submissions should be mailed to Raja, and I should be CC'd in them. Also, please make sure the submissions are either on OneDrive, Google Drive, or Dropbox. If you are making submissions through WeTransfer, we'd appreciate if you could write that in your email, because sometimes the links expire and then we have to reach out to companies, and it just creates more work for the companies and ourselves too. So we'd really appreciate if you use OneDrive and Google Drive, because that makes our work easier as well. So that's all from my side, and now we'll be taking some questions.
There are a couple of questions pertaining to where to find a scorecard. Any further questions, you can always reach out to either me or I can have Safia's email address there as well. If you have is there anybody else who would like to ask something? Give it a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there was a question that I received once about how to show your gender data. I just want to clarify that we've included the tool that helps you calculate your pay gap. It is in the scorecard. So if you go down to question 3A, there is a link to a pay gap calculator that is used by the Australian government. So if if you don't know how to calculate a pay gap, voice is not here. Okay, that's a valid question, but it is a relevant comment. Now I predict. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat myself. Sorry. If your company does not calculate the pay gap, or if you yourself don't know how to calculate the pay gap on behalf of your company, in question 3A, I have linked a tool that will do that for you. It will lead to, I think, an Excel chart that has some formulas already built in. So you just have to write the relevant numbers and your pay gap data will be provided to you. For companies that this is a tool by the Australian government. For companies that saying that will tell you, or if your management tells you that pay gap data nahi report hoti, there are multiple countries that have now mandated the reporting of the pay gap information. In fact, in England and Ireland, there is a separate report that is published that has pay gap information. So letting you know, and we did have about 8 companies that gave us their pay gap, large organizations, a couple of banks, and we are not judging how big the pay gap is. We know that there is a pay gap. This is not, okay. And another query that I received was, we are an equal opportunity employer. We don't discriminate. The pay gap does not imply that you discriminate. The pay gap is you can say maybe it's a natural phenomenon, but it is what happens. And it can happen due to multiple reasons. For example, you just don't have enough women in senior management. So women then naturally are in lower paying positions. Or for example, your industry doesn't have a lot of women in it. So there's various reasons. We don't say that the company is a terrible employer because they have a pay gap. We're collecting data to understand the trends of employment of women in the formal sector.
Can I just add to this?
Yes, once.
So I also think that when companies disclose their pay gap, it doesn't make them look as like bad employers, but instead of it shows us the opposite, that they're actually taking out the time to calculate that gap and narrow it down. Because one of the things that happens when you calculate your pay gap is that you eventually try to narrow it down. So it works inversely. And we do think that companies that have shown us their pay gaps are companies who've done really well in the scorecard and other sections. So it's actually the opposite of what you might believe in the first place. So do disclose the pay gap.
What's also relevant to mention here is that I think 4 or 5 of the companies that did disclose their pay gap are also in the top 10 of the Employer of Choice Awards. I think there are no questions coming in, but I'm sure they will come in after this is over. There's in the Q&A box. Kindly share the required documents or questionnaire. Yes, so I have put the link there in the chat box. I'll just copy it again, but it's on our website under publications. We will also have a large banner running on our website's homepage, which will give you information about the process. And Safia will be sending you an email after this is over, after the webinar has also been uploaded on YouTube, that has the link to the questionnaire, that has the link to how to register for the awards, and a link to the recording of this webinar. If that is all, then thank you so much for being a part of this webinar today. Thank you, Nazrish, for taking out the time to open the webinar, and Safia for going through what is important for anyone submitting to consider based on past trends and what we hope to see in the future. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your submissions.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the awards this year.
And the deadline is May 15. So we will also send you a timeline of when the next webinars will take place. So please go over the scorecard from before, start collecting your documents, your information, so that you're prepped with your questions for the next webinar, which will most likely take place sometime in March. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Bye.